Caped Crusader canceled. What? The Batman 2 given the green light. Confused? Well, you're not the only one. So, in quick succession, the first story was the animated series that Matt Reeves had some involvement in with Bruce Timm. Was canceled for HBO Max. They're going to shop it around, and more than likely it'll get picked up because, hey, it's Batman. And I do recall Zaslav giving a nod that he was not above licensing out Warner Brothers properties to other venues because, you know, if nothing else, they'll make money off of the licensing fee. So, Caped Crusader was this idea that was percolating there, and J.J. Abrams was involved in it, and I was like, oh. And then even Bruce Timm at the DC Fandom Guitars talking about, we're going to have representation and all that. So it's like every time you get a whiff of that, it's like, okay, what's wrong with it? Because that's always, the only reason that's used is a shield for lackluster plots and whatnot. Because they don't care about the tokens they tokenize, not really. It's just the way it is. So, rather cynical and everything. But for the most part, it's just if you don't like my movie you hate, go down the list. And but could it have been good? Yes. Some of these programs, the marketing for it is always woke, but the actual product itself, it may not entirely be. But the damage done to it by that sort of activity is tremendous, and it gets worse as we go forward. But anyway, it looked cool. It just in the brief mock-ups you got, they were talking about returning to the origins of Batman, and that I don't know if it was exactly clear that it would be set in the 40s or that it was supposed to be a prequel to the original animated series, which took a lot of the aesthetics of the era there, but transplanted it onto a modern era. So, you had computers and whatnot, and yet things looked like the 40s. And, of course, their initial inspiration was the Max Fleischer cartoons for Superman. So that's cool, and it's fitting because that's the era these characters came from. And it would have been a cool thing to see done right. That might have been interesting. And it may be. I don't know. I'm dubious on 2 points because Bad Robot's involvement. But also the DC animated films and what have you just haven't really been all that great. They reached this pinnacle of excellence with the Batman the Animated Series in the 90s. And that is the best depiction of Batman outside of comics ever. None of the movies come close to it. And it was a moment in time, I guess, and it's moved on, and they just can't seem to recapture that. Since then, a lot of the DC animated movies, some are interesting, they have some cool moments, some of them are just god-awful, but they never really came close to that level of achievement. And so I was never really all that excited about it. You can hope for the best and all that, but what have you. But it got the axe, more or less. Not a complete axe. It can live on, and I suspect it will. There were some other cartoons that also got some Looney Tunes cartoons they were going to do. And those also taken away from the lineup for HBO Max. But again, they can be farmed out to Netflix, Amazon, what have you. And so that seems to be the plan. There. Now, initially I thought, well, this is another sign of the decline in the power of J.J. Abrams, and it still is, because I think he would have preferred the original deal. But a lot of stuff of his is getting canceled these days. And sooner or later, even Hollywood figures out when they're being conned, and that appears to be the case. However, all along, probably the best of the Bad Robot crowd appears to be Matt Reeves. Certainly his Planet of the Apes films were really good. His Batman had some interesting aspects to it. It had a lot of cool atmospherics, and all that. But the story it's just not good. Plus, it might have been stolen from another guy. So, but that's a whole other story. But anyway, it didn't hit the projected profits that they wanted. It didn't make Marvel money. It did, I think, fairly well. But if you go by the metrics of Batman versus Superman, it did worse than that. So then, Warner Brothers panicked after that. But then again, that was a mistake for them to do so. Batman vs. Superman was a very flawed film, but there was still enough interest there to build on and, right the ship. But they didn't do that. They panicked and all that. So, the whole story. So after hearing Cape Crusader was off of HBO Max, along came another story. Well, it appears that they've signed a first look deal with Matt Reeves. And earlier on, they were saying, they haven't greenlit the Batman 2 yet. Oh. And then so it was like, oh boy, is it really in trouble? I never really believed it that you wouldn't get the sequel. I was wondering if the TV show spinoffs are in trouble. Perhaps the Penguin, the Penguin is not, but I don't know about the Arkham series. But maybe so. They've made this deal with Reeves to have the first look deal under film projects and television, and so perhaps they'll continue with his shows. Now, it's interesting on two fronts. Zaslav has been talking about wanting a solidified shared universe approach to the DC characters, and it's rumored that he's not crazy about multiverse. Well, if you're not going to have the Batman involved in that, then it's multiverse. So you've got two competing interests almost here at the same time, and that's always been the worry. Done well and whatnot, I think it could work, but it's a risk. And but here again, you run into the same thing that keeps happening with DC films, and that there's these diamonds in the rough. Some things are successful, some things are terrible, and you can't scrap it all to get out of it. So the Batman didn't achieve what it was supposed to, but it achieved a pretty good chunk of money. And there's interest in it and whatnot. And also they're interested in keeping a talent like Matt Reeves around. So he wants to do a Batman 2. They'll move forward with that. And by that, I'm assuming that Zaslav has come up looking at the metrics such as that he has seen an economical means by which this makes sense to go ahead and keep going with this. Earlier, they were saying, well, it's going to be phased out. Well, that doesn't mean it's not happening. It could be, says, yeah, you'll do your Batman 2, and unless it bombs miserably, then there'll be a Batman 3, and then that's the end of it. Because all along, I think that's all Reeves, he's kind of doing his Nolan take on Batman, and then he'll move on to the other stuff he wants to do. But there's these spin-offs and these shows for HBO Max. It appeared that Zaslav was moving away from that idea, and I suspected that he could return to it when the DCEU is a mega profitable enterprise, and then you've got some extra cash there to expand on it and make even more, perhaps. But there again, they've already had a series, Peacemaker, and it was popular, it was successful. So there's going to be another Peacemaker. So you see, you can't just scrap it all and start over. That's the way it is. There's always things like that. So maybe there'll be other shows coming out of the DCEU down the road, but as of now, not so much. So, of course, Joker is yet another project that's not connected to anything, but it was in fact, it's much more popular than the Batman, and so that explains that. Otherwise, if it wasn't all that great, he would give it the axe. Plus, it was cheap to make. Now the next one's it got a bigger budget, but that's still, cheap in comparison to these, blockbuster superhero spectaculars and that sort of thing. So, he's worked around this and sees it that way, and that you can have two Batman. Now, it's looking more and more like the Ben Affleck Batman will continue, or these reshoots and stuff will eventually are there to establish that he's no longer there. I don't see how, since they're abandoning the idea of time warping the universe with Michael Keaton and all that. Apparently that'll be a one and done deal with the Flash, unless they create and do embrace the multiverse, which I think they should. Then later you could have another side project, which would be a Batman Beyond thing. While they still can, because the clock never stops ticking, unfortunately. And if they had something ready to go, now would be the opportune time to get that underway with Michael Keaton. But so the other possibility here is, so if Affleck is leaving, do they replace him with another actor? Or is Zaslav saying, look, yeah, you can continue on with the Batman 2 and all that, but after The Flash, we're going to merge the universes, and Robert Pattinson's going to be the Batman of the DCEU. So that would hinge on the idea that they're not going to continue with Affleck, but still wanting him around. So if he's like, yeah, okay, I'll do this to stay in good with you guys and all that, but I really don't want to do any more Batman. That could be a possibility. He's wrapping it up. And so after The Flash, just perhaps, haven't heard anything like this, that they could quickly shoot a scene where it's Robert Pattinson's Batman at the end of the movie as the universe has changed. Possibly. Now, the tone and characteristics of the Batman don't mesh well with a shared universe. It's another attempt at grounding it in reality, like the Nolan films. And gets a bit far removed from even the comic books, really. And so that's still going to tread on Reeves' territory. But if he's okay with it, then, and if the boss man speaks and there's this deal that's very lucrative for him, and perhaps other projects that he's very interested in, now has a great possibility of seeing fruition, then that might be enough to win him over and say, yeah, okay, then my Batman will be your Batman in your playground there, perhaps. So there's possibilities there. Or it's just there's going to be two Batman for quite a while. Hell, maybe even three. I don't know. But I can see, for me, it's easy for the demarcation there. Robert Pattinson's in this other reality where he's the only superhero around, I assume. And then Ben Affleck is the shared universe Batman, who lives in a world very similar to the comic books, where there's a Superman, there's a Wonder Woman, and so on and so forth. And but there's always the fear that the average moviegoer who just wants to have who just mostly knows Batman and whatnot from movies and that sort of thing, might have some amount of confusion. Well, wait a minute, it was Robert Pattinson in the movie, and now in Justice League it's been, but I don't think that's as serious a problem as they fear. But, they're in a struggling position because, again, they've had probably more flaws and flops than successes, and that's, where they are. So, the only thing surprising here, I think, is the show's continuing. They really want to keep Matt Reeves around, so maybe that's the deal. So the Penguin series is a go, I guess. But it flies into the face of him wanting to move away from producing stuff for HBO Max. But again, it's a series, so it's not a film. It's just trying to keep your feet in both puddles, I guess. And that's the nature of this. It keeps happening for DC. It's just because sometimes they win, sometimes they lose. They can't make it all one. So I guess that's where it is. So anyway, you're going to get a lot of Batman one way or another. That's the deal. So there you are.